I can't remember the exact moment when the unease crept in. Maybe it was gradual, like a crack in a windshield spreading ever so slowly. Life with Claire had been good. Almost 10 years of marriage, and our son, Ethan, was the bright center of it all. We had a rhythm, a predictable, comforting rhythm. I went to work at the shop. She managed the accounts for a law firm, and evenings were our sanctuary. Or at least they used to be. Lately, though, Claire had started coming home late. "Work's been insane," she'd say, slipping out of her heels, her face weary but her excuses steady. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But that night, as I rinsed the dishes, I saw something through the kitchen window that set my pulse racing. The glare of headlights, sharp white beams, illuminated our driveway briefly before cutting out. A sleek black BMW. Claire stepped out, smoothing her skirt, before walking up to the door. My heart skipped a beat, and not in the way it used to when I saw her. Something about that car was familiar. Too familiar. But the thought passed as quickly as it came. She entered, kissed me on the cheek, and asked about Ethan. The evening went on, as ordinary as any other. Still, that image stuck in my head. That car. I couldn't shake it. The next day, wanting to break the tension building inside me, I decided to surprise her. I booked a table at her favorite restaurant and bought her a bouquet of her favorite lilies. By the time the clock hit 6, I was parked outside her office building, excitement buzzing in my chest. Except she wasn't there. I called her, and the phone rang endlessly before going to voicemail. 5 minutes later, she called back. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice light but distracted. "I'm so sorry. A meeting came up last minute, and I couldn't step out to call. It's been crazy." "It's fine," I replied, but my words tasted bitter. The dinner plan was ruined, but I told myself not to make a big deal of it. Claire wouldn't lie to me, not after all these years, right? Yet, as I drove home, the image of that BMW flashed in my mind again. It felt like a puzzle piece I didn't know how to fit, but the picture hinted it was one I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. The next few weeks passed in a haze of normalcy, or at least what looked like it on the surface. Claire seemed the same, tired from work but affectionate, attentive to Ethan, and casually brushing off her late evenings as part of her hectic schedule. Yet, the knot in my stomach tightened every time I saw her phone light up with a text she didn't share or when she disappeared for hours on errands that didn't make sense. And then there was that car, the BMW. One night while taking the trash out, the memory hit me like a sucker punch. 3 months ago, I'd seen her getting out of the same car late at night. I hadn't thought much of it then. She'd explained it was an expensive Uber paid for by her company after a late client dinner. I'd laughed it off, teasing her about living the high life. But now, the explanation felt thin, riddled with holes I couldn't ignore. My brain churned with questions I didn't dare voice. I began noticing the small things. How Claire had started wearing perfume more often, how she lingered in front of the mirror a little longer before heading out. Her wardrobe had subtly changed too. Nothing dramatic, but there were new additions I couldn't recall seeing before. A blouse, a pair of heels, small things that felt like whispers of a secret I wasn't supposed to hear. One evening, while she was in the shower, I noticed her phone lying unlocked on the counter. My heart raced, palms sweating. I told myself to walk away, to trust her, to not invade her privacy. But my hand moved before I could stop it. Her messages were nothing unusual at first. Text from her sister, a friend discussing a dinner plan, work-related chatter. And then a name I didn't recognize, Liam. The most recent message was short, but burned itself into my mind. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. My hand shook as I scrolled further, piecing together fragments of a story I never thought I'd be part of. The messages went back more than a year. Discreet planning, hotel reservations, inside jokes, and photos. Photos of her laughing with him. Selfies in places she'd never mentioned visiting. Gifts he'd sent her. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. My wife, my Claire, was living a life I knew nothing about. A life where she shared laughter and intimacy with a man who wasn't me. The bathroom door opened, snapping me out of my trance. I barely had time to lock her phone and set it down before she emerged in her robe, smiling at me like nothing had happened. "Everything okay?" she asked, toweling her damp hair. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just checking my emails. Dinner's almost ready." As I walked out of the room, my mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. Anger, betrayal, confusion. But one thing was certain: I couldn't confront her yet. Not like this. Not without a plan. If she could lie to me so easily, what else was she capable of? I needed to know more. I needed the truth. For the next few days, I operated like a man possessed. On the outside, I kept up appearances, smiling through dinner, helping Ethan with his homework, even cracking jokes with Claire like nothing was wrong. But inside, I was a storm of anger and suspicion. Every glance at her a reminder of the betrayal I'd uncovered. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. If I exploded now, she'd twist it, turn it into me overreacting, or accuse me of invading her privacy. I needed proof. Undeniable proof that left her no room to maneuver. Late one night, after she'd gone to bed, I pulled out my laptop and ordered a few things: a small voice recorder, a set of hidden cameras, and a cloning tool for her phone. It felt surreal, like I was starring in my own spy movie. But this wasn't a game. This was my life, my marriage, my family. And if she thought she could keep living her double life without consequences, she was dead wrong. The equipment arrived quickly, discreetly packed in plain boxes. That evening, after Claire left for another late meeting, I got to work. I hid the cameras in strategic spots: the living room, the bedroom, the hallway by the front door. Places where I could capture conversations or actions that might reveal the truth. The voice recorder went in her car, tucked beneath the driver's seat. And the cloning tool? That was the most nerve-wracking part. I waited for the right moment, a window of opportunity when she'd be distracted or away from her phone long enough for me to use it. It came 2 nights later when she stepped into the shower. My hands shook as I connected her phone to the cloning device, copying every message, call log, and photo to a burner phone I'd bought specifically for this. By the time she was done showering, her phone was back on the counter, untouched. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every part of me wanted to dive into that cloned phone, to know every sordid detail, but I couldn't risk Claire catching me. So, I waited until I was alone the next day, sitting in my truck in the parking lot at work, staring at the screen as I opened the messaging app. The first few messages were innocuous enough, but then I found them. The texts to and from Liam. Reading through them was like peeling back layers of my own skin, exposing raw, pulsing nerves. I saw their plans laid out in black and white. The hotel bookings, the secret meetups, the excuses she fed me to cover her tracks. There was no denying it now. Claire had been seeing Liam for over a year. One message in particular broke me. It was from just a week ago. "I wish I could spend the night, but he'd notice if I was gone too long. You're worth the risk, though." Risk. That's what I was to her now. A risk. Not a husband. Not a partner. Just an obstacle to navigate around. I sat there in the truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My jaw clenched, my teeth grinding against each other. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to go home, to confront her, to tear this lie apart. But I knew better. If she was this good at deception, I needed to be just as careful. For Ethan. For myself. For the truth. That evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Claire asked about my day. Her voice was light, her smile effortless. I played along, talking about work and plans for the weekend. But inside, I was counting the minutes, the seconds, until I could make her face what she'd done. She had no idea that her carefully crafted world was about to collapse. And this time, I'd be the one holding the strings. I had everything I needed: the messages, the photos, even the hotel receipts I'd found buried in her emails. Every detail painted a picture of betrayal so vivid it made my stomach turn. But as much as I wanted to storm in and confront her, I knew that if I didn't handle this carefully, she'd find a way to twist it. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Ethan. I couldn't let her manipulate the situation and put him in the crossfire. So, I waited, biding my time. I needed the perfect moment, and that moment came one Saturday evening. Ethan had been invited for a sleepover at his best friend's house, leaving Claire and me alone for the first time in weeks. She was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, completely unaware that her double life was about to come crashing down. As we sat down to eat, I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. Every bite of food felt like sandpaper against my throat. Every word she said grated against the raw wound of my trust. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Claire," I began, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "We need to talk." She looked up, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Sure," she said, her tone light. But I saw it, a flicker of something in her eyes. Worry? Suspicion? She put the fork down. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath. "I know about Liam." The room fell silent. The only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her face froze, her eyes wide, as if her brain was scrambling to process what I'd just said. What are you talking about?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "Don't," I said, my voice sharper now. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I mean. I've seen the messages. The photos. I know everything, Claire." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a moment, she looked like a fish gasping for air. Then came the excuses, the denials. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I snapped, cutting her off. "You've been seeing him for over a year. While I've been here, taking care of Ethan, keeping this family together, you've been sneaking around behind my back. Lying to me. To our son." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought I saw genuine remorse. But then, she straightened up, her expression hardening. "If you're so perfect, maybe I wouldn't have needed to look somewhere else," she shot back, her voice rising. "You're always working, always busy, and I felt invisible. Do you even know what that's like?" Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her derail the conversation. "Don't you dare make this about me," I said coldly. "This isn't about my job or your feelings. It's about you betraying me, betraying our family." She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "You want to talk about betrayal? You've been snooping through my phone, spying on me like some kind of stalker. How do you think that makes me feel?" "Feel?" I laughed bitterly, standing up to face her. "You want to talk about feelings? How do you think I felt reading those messages? Seeing the photos of you with him, knowing that every time you kissed me goodbye, you were lying to my face." Her eyes darted to the door, as if she was calculating her escape route. "You know what? Fine," she said, her voice icy. "If you want a divorce, let's do it. But don't think for a second you're going to take Ethan away from me. I'll fight you for custody, and trust me, the courts won't side with a man who invades his wife's privacy." Her words were a dagger, but I didn't flinch. I was ready for this. "Go ahead," I said, pulling out my phone, "because I've got proof of everything. Not just the affair, but the way you've lied, manipulated, and schemed. And if you want to play dirty, Claire, I'm ready." Her face turned pale, her bravado crumbling. For the first time that night, she looked afraid. Good. She should be. This was far from over. The fear in her eyes flickered for only a moment before it was replaced with something colder, sharper, defiance. Claire straightened her shoulders, crossing her arms tightly against her chest. "You think this is going to scare me?" she hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." I could feel the tension in the room thickening, like a coiled spring ready to snap. "Claire," I said, my voice low and steady, "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to lay the truth on the table. You've destroyed our marriage, and the least you can do is own up to it." She scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Destroyed our marriage? Don't flatter yourself. You've been absent for years, always working, always busy. Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to your spreadsheets, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting to keep my composure. "So this is my fault now? You betrayed me, Claire. You lied to me, to Ethan, to yourself. Don't turn this around and act like you're the victim." "I am the victim," she snapped. "Do you know what it's like to feel unwanted? To live with someone who doesn't even see you anymore?" "Don't," I growled, my voice cutting through her words. "Don't you dare pretend this was about anything other than your selfishness." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then, Claire's voice softened, taking on a tone I recognized all too well. "Manipulation. If you go through with this, she said, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. You'll destroy Ethan's life. Do you really want to put him through a messy divorce? Do you want to be the reason he grows up in a broken home? My stomach churned, but I didn't flinch. I'd anticipated this. Don't you dare use Ethan as a shield for your actions, I said, my voice cold. He's the only reason I haven't walked out that door already. Her expression shifted again, this time to one of feigned sadness. You're not thinking clearly, David, she said softly. You're angry, and I get that. But if you do this, if you try to turn Ethan against me, you'll regret it. The courts always favor the mother. Do you really want to risk losing him altogether? Her words were calculated, designed to sow doubt, but I'd come too far to let her manipulate me now. I took a step closer, meeting her gaze with unflinching determination. You're right about one thing, Claire. I am angry. Angry that you've turned our lives into a lie. But don't mistake my anger for weakness. I'll fight for Ethan with everything I've got, and I'll make damn sure the truth comes out. Her bravado faltered again, but she quickly masked it with indignation. Fine, she spat. You want to fight? You'll get one. But don't think for a second that I'll make this easy for you. I wouldn't expect anything less, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Just remember, you brought this on yourself. She turned and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline course through me, before finally sinking into a chair. The confrontation had ended, but the battle was just beginning. Upstairs, I could hear her pacing, her phone buzzing with what I could only assume were frantic texts to Liam or her friends. I didn't care. She could scheme all she wanted. I wasn't backing down, not for her and not for her lies. This wasn't just about exposing her betrayal anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity and protecting Ethan from the fallout of her actions. I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. Not ever again. The following days were tense, a cold war brewing under our roof. Claire avoided me as much as possible, retreating into herself and whispering into her phone when she thought I wasn't around. Ethan sensed the shift in the house, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. I hated the way it affected him, his bright smile dimmed by the uncertainty swirling around us. I needed to push forward to gather the final piece of the puzzle. The voice recorder in her car had been running for days, capturing every conversation, every phone call. I hadn't listened to it yet, dreading what I might hear, but knowing it was necessary. Late one night, after Ethan was asleep and Claire had locked herself in the bedroom, I retrieved the recorder. Sitting in my truck in the driveway, I plugged in my headphones and pressed play. At first, there was nothing, just the hum of the engine, the shuffle of Claire's movements as she drove. Then, her voice cut through the static, crisp and clear. Hey, it's me, she said, her tone lighter than I'd heard it in weeks. Yeah, I'm leaving the house now. Should be there in 20. A man's voice responded, deep and smooth. Liam, can't wait to see you, babe. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to keep listening. The conversation was casual at first, plans for dinner, inside jokes, laughter that made my blood boil. But then the tone shifted, their words becoming more intimate, more damning. You know, Liam said, I still don't understand why you're putting up with him. You could leave any time. Claire sighed. It's not that simple. We have Ethan to think about. Besides, her voice dropped to a whisper. He's not as dumb as he looks. He's been suspicious lately. I think he knows. There it was, the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. She knew I was onto her, and instead of coming clean, she was planning her next move. I fast-forwarded through the recording, listening to snippets of their conversations. Each word was a dagger, but I kept going, needing to arm myself with as much evidence as possible. Then a particular exchange stopped me cold. What if he finds out? Liam asked, his voice tinged with unease. Claire laughed, a bitter edge to her tone. Let him. He's too spineless to do anything about it. Besides, if he tries to take Ethan from me, I'll make sure he regrets it. I'll tell the courts he's unstable, that he's been violent. They'll believe me. They always do. My vision blurred, anger and disbelief crashing over me like a tidal wave. She was willing to drag my name through the mud, to weaponize lies against me, just to protect her secret. I yanked the headphones off, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. This was it. The moment I realized there was no saving what we had. Claire wasn't the woman I thought I knew, the partner I'd built my life with. She was someone else entirely, someone I couldn't trust. But she underestimated me. She thought I'd fold under the weight of her threats, that I'd let her control the narrative. She was wrong. I had the evidence now, the texts, the photos, the recordings. And soon, I'd have the power to confront her in a way she couldn't twist or manipulate. For Ethan's sake, I had to handle this carefully. But for my own sake, I couldn't let her win. The next phase of my plan was already forming in my mind. It was time to expose her lies once and for all. The weight of the recorder's revelation sat heavy on me as I devised the next step. Confrontation hadn't worked. Claire was a master manipulator, adept at deflecting blame and turning the situation on its head. This time, I needed to catch her in a moment where her own words would condemn her, a moment where she wouldn't have the chance to deny or twist. That moment came quicker than I expected. It was another late night. Claire arrived home, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor as she entered the house. "You're still up?" she asked, feigning surprise, but her tone held the edge of annoyance. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, staring at the whiskey glass in my hand. The amber liquid swirled as I rolled it gently, my thoughts sharper than the burn in my throat. She gave a nonchalant shrug and disappeared upstairs. This time, I was ready. I turned on the recorder app on my phone and followed her. When I entered the bedroom, she was already out of her dress, standing by the closet in her slip. She glanced at me over her shoulder. "What's your problem now?" My jaw tightened. "We need to talk." She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "David, we've talked enough. If you're going to accuse me of something again, just save it. I am exhausted." "No accusations," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Just the truth." She turned to face me fully, her hands on her hips. "What truth? That you've been acting like a paranoid lunatic for weeks? That you've been digging through my things, spying on me? That you don't trust me?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "The truth about you. About Liam. About the affair you've been having for over a year." Her face hardened instantly, but I caught the briefest flicker of panic in her eyes. "This again," she snapped. "David, I told you Liam is just a friend. You're making something out of nothing." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up. "Is that what this is? Nothing?" I played the recording, her own voice spilling into the room. "Let him. He's too spineless to do anything about it. Besides, if he tries to take Ethan from me, I'll make sure he regrets it." Her expression froze, her face draining of color. For a moment, she looked like she might crumble, but then her mask slipped back into place. "You recorded me? What kind of sick? What kind of husband?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "What kind of husband records his wife because she's been lying to him for months? Because she's been sneaking around behind his back, cheating, and planning to use their son as a pawn? That's what kind of husband?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "You think I'd just sit back and let you ruin everything? That I wouldn't fight for Ethan? For the truth?" Her composure cracked. "David, you don't understand," she stammered, her voice suddenly trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Spare me," I said coldly. "I've heard enough, and so will anyone else who needs to when this goes to court." Her expression shifted from fear to rage in an instant. "You think you're going to win this? I'll destroy you, David. You'll lose everything." "No, Claire," I said, stepping closer. "You already did. You lost me, you lost my trust, and now you're about to lose the power you think you have." She stood there, silent, her breath coming in shallow gasps. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of control, a sense that I wasn't a victim anymore. "This family used to mean everything to me," I said, my voice softening. "But you tore it apart, and now I'll do whatever it takes to protect Ethan from the wreckage you've created." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. For once, she had nothing to say, nothing to twist, nothing to manipulate. The battle was far from over, but I knew one thing. I wasn't fighting for her anymore. I was fighting for Ethan, for myself, and for the life we deserved one built on truth, not lies. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Claire's usual morning routine, making coffee, checking her phone, fussing with Ethan's school things, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, staring blankly ahead. Ethan had stayed at his friend's house the night before, giving us the space we desperately needed. But the silence between us was deafening. I grabbed a cup of coffee and sat across from her. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she broke the silence. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice flat, as though she already knew the answer. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. "We tell Ethan," I said simply. "Not everything. He doesn't need to know the details. But he deserves to know that things are going to change." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "No, absolutely not. You're not dragging him into this." "He's already in it, Claire," I said, my tone calm but firm. "He's not stupid. He knows something's wrong. And the longer we pretend everything's fine, the worse it'll be for him." She set her mug down with a sharp clink. "He's 8, David. He doesn't need to hear this. I'll fix things." "You don't get to decide that anymore," I interrupted. "You've been fixing things in your own way for over a year, and look where it's gotten us." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. I could see it in her eyes. The realization that she'd lost control, that her lies had finally caught up with her. Later that day, Ethan came home. His smile lit up the room, but it broke my heart knowing that we were about to shatter his world. I took a deep breath and knelt in front of him. "Hey, buddy," I said gently. "Can we talk for a minute?" He nodded, his face serious. I guided him to the couch, sitting beside him while Claire stood a few feet away, arms crossed and silent. "Ethan," I began, "your mom and I love you so much. That will never, ever change." But my throat tightened, and I had to swallow hard before continuing. "Things between us, they haven't been good, and we've decided it's best if we live in separate homes." His eyes widened, confusion and fear flashing across his face. "What? Why?" Claire started to step forward, but I held up a hand, stopping her. "It's not because of you," I assured him. "You've done nothing wrong. This is about grown-up problems, things that we couldn't fix. But no matter what happens, we'll both be here for you. Always." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he looked between the two of us, searching for answers we couldn't give. "I don't want you to split up," he whispered. "I know, buddy," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't want this either. But sometimes, even when two people love their family, they can't stay together." He turned to Claire, his little face full of desperation. "Why can't you just make up? Why can't you just be happy again?" Claire's lips trembled, but she said nothing. For once, her sharp tongue was silent, her defenses useless against the raw honesty of our son's pain. "I promise," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "we'll do everything we can to make this easier for you. You're the most important person in the world to us." He nodded slowly, tears spilling down his cheeks. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as his small body shook with sobs. Over his shoulder, I saw Claire wipe her eyes, her face crumpling with guilt and sorrow. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Ethan retreated to his room, needing space to process everything. Claire and I avoided each other, the weight of our shared failure hanging heavily between us. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the flickering light of the television without really watching it. My mind raced with plans, with questions about what came next. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, the truth was out, and the fallout had begun. The next steps would be the hardest, but I was ready. For Ethan, for myself, for the life we deserved. The days that followed were tense and heavy, filled with quiet avoidance and unspoken tension. Ethan clung to me more than ever, his usual bright energy dimmed by the weight of our conversation. Claire had retreated further into herself, her phone glued to her hand as she disappeared into the bedroom for hours at a time. But I wasn't idle. I had work to do. The first thing I did was meet with a lawyer. I needed to understand my rights, my options, and how best to protect Ethan through this process. I laid everything out: the recordings, the messages, the evidence I'd gathered. The The lawyer nodded as I spoke, her expression serious. "You've done your homework," she said. "That's good. But custody battles can be messy, especially when one parent is determined to fight dirty. Are you ready for that?" I nodded, though the thought of Claire dragging Ethan into this made my stomach churn. "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure he's safe." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then let's get started." Back at home, Claire must have sensed the shift. She started leaving for long stretches, sometimes coming back late at night, sometimes not at all. When she did return, her mood oscillated between icy silence and fiery arguments. "You're turning him against me," she snapped one evening as we stood in the kitchen, the dishes from dinner untouched on the counter. "Don't flatter yourself," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "Ethan is a smart kid. He sees what's happening." She slammed a cupboard shut, her eyes blazing. "You think you're the hero in all this, don't you? The perfect father, the perfect victim. But you're not blameless, David. You've been distant for years. You think your paycheck makes up for everything." I met her glare with a steady gaze. "This isn't about me. It's about what you did, what you chose to do. You betrayed our family, Claire. You don't get to play the victim." Her mouth opened as if to retort, but she seemed to think better of it. Instead, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I heard her car start and speed away, the sound fading into the night. The next day, I sat Ethan down again. "How are you doing, buddy?" I asked, sitting beside him on the couch. He shrugged, his small shoulders heavy with a burden no child should carry. "It's hard," he admitted. "I miss how things used to be." "I know," I said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I miss it too, but we're going to get through this together. You and me, okay?" He nodded, leaning against me. "I don't want Mom to be mad all the time." I swallowed hard, guilt gnawing at me. "She's not mad at you, Ethan. None of this is your fault. Remember that?" "Okay. Okay," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. That night, I decided to take the next step. Claire had been growing bolder in her threats, tossing out accusations of manipulation and emotional instability every chance she got. I knew it was only a matter of time before she tried to use them against me. So, as she walked through the door after another mysterious late meeting, I was ready. I hit record on my phone, slipping it into my pocket as I confronted her. "You're late again," I said, my tone even but pointed. She rolled her eyes. "Work ran over." "What else is new?" "Work," I said, crossing my arms. "Right? Or was it Liam this time?" Her face flushed, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me. "You're obsessed, David. You've been spying on me, twisting everything into some conspiracy. Do you even hear yourself?" "I hear myself just fine," I said. "But I think the courts might be more interested in hearing you, especially about how you plan to use Ethan as a pawn." Her face went pale, her bravado faltering. "You wouldn't. Try me," I said coldly. "You've lied, cheated, and threatened me, Claire. But I won't let you hurt him. Not anymore." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Finally, she turned and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind her. As I sat down in the living room, the recording safely stored on my phone, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. The turning point had come, and there was no going back now. The tension in the house became unbearable, like living in a constant state of siege. Every interaction with Claire felt like a sparring match, each word calculated, every glance heavy with accusation or contempt. But this time, I wasn't backing down. I had the truth, the evidence, and a plan to finally break free from her grasp. It was a Sunday evening when everything came to a head. Ethan was at a friend's house again, and the silence in the house felt like the calm before a storm. Claire sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. I stood in the doorway, holding the folder that contained everything I'd collected: texts, photos, recordings, and more. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. "What now, David? More accusations? More paranoia?" "No," I said, stepping into the room and placing the folder on the coffee table in front of her. "Just the facts." Her gaze flicked to the folder, then back to me. What's this? Everything, I said simply. Proof of your affair. Proof of your lies. Proof of how you plan to manipulate and destroy me to cover your tracks. She didn't move at first, her expression a mask of defiance. But as I opened the folder and slid the photos and transcripts toward her, the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she picked up a photo, one of her and Liam in a hotel lobby, locked in an embrace. This is an invasion of privacy, she stammered, her voice shaking. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted. You gave up your right to privacy the moment you decided to betray me and this family. Her defiance returned, but it was weaker now, her voice cracking as she spoke. You think this makes you the good guy? Spying on your wife? Playing detective? You're no better than me. No better? I said, my voice rising. I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I didn't try to weaponize our son against you. So don't you dare compare what I've done to what you've done. She stood, her fists clenched, her face a mixture of rage and desperation. What do you want from me, David? An apology? Fine. I am sorry. I'm sorry I needed something more than this miserable life you've given me. I'm sorry I couldn't live up to your perfect expectations. I stared at her, my chest heaving with the effort to keep my anger in check. What I wanted, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, was the woman I married, the woman I thought I could trust. But she's gone, Claire. You killed her. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to be like this, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. But you did, I said softly. And now, we have to live with the consequences. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of our shattered marriage hanging heavily between us. Finally, she spoke. What happens now? You leave, I said firmly. I've already spoken to my lawyer. You can take time to find a place, but you need to go. Ethan stays with me. Her eyes widened. You can't take him from me. I'm not taking him, I said. He's staying in his home, where he feels safe. If you want to be part of his life, you'll need to prove you're putting his well-being first. Not your lies. Not your affair. Him. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked defeated. You really hate me that much? I shook my head. I don't hate you, Claire. I pity you. I pity what you've become. She didn't respond, her gaze dropping to the floor. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone with the wreckage of what she'd done. In the weeks that followed, Claire moved out. The house felt emptier without her, but it also felt lighter, free of the toxic tension that had filled every corner. Ethan and I began to rebuild, creating a new routine, a new normal. He was hurt, confused, and angry at times, but I made sure he knew he was loved, that he was safe, and that he was my priority. Claire tried to repair her relationship with Ethan, but the damage was done. He saw through her tears, her apologies, her excuses. For the first time, he saw her for who she truly was, a woman who put her desires above her family. I won't say it was easy because it wasn't, but in the end we found peace. And for the first time in years, I could look at my reflection and feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. We were free, Ethan and I. Free to live a life built on truth, trust, and a hope for a better future. So, what do you think about my story? Drop a comment with your thoughts on my decision and how you would have handled it.